Hello and welcome to Today's Take, hosted by me, Jayne, the podcast that goes beyond the headlines and gives you the story behind the story that you see on TV. And this week it was as shocking as it was seismic, the political assassination that has reverberated around America.
I want to start off with breaking news out of the United States. A right-wing political figure, Charlie Kirk, has been assassinated during an event at a university campus in Utah. The person suspected of killing him is this morning in police custody after a manhunt that lasted more than 30 hours.
There was actually a tip-off from a family member that led police to arrest 22-year-old Tyler Robertson. Up until now, he had been America's most wanted, but here he was in this red and dusty town near the border of Arizona.
I hope he gets the death penalty. What he did, Charlie Kirk was the finest person. He didn't deserve this. He worked so hard and so well. Everybody liked him.
Hey, everybody. JD Vance here, live from my office in the White House complex and filling in for somebody who cannot be filled in for, but I'm going to try to do my best. My dear friend, the great Charlie Kirk.
Last night we heard his widow, Erica Kirk, break her silence, essentially with a message to the people she described as evildoers, saying that they do not realise what they have done and what they have unleashed across the entire of the United States.
The cries of this widow will echo around the world like a battle cry.
Covering every aspect of that event and its repercussions for those of us here in Australia is the North America correspondent for The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald, Michael Koziol, and he joins me now. Michael, welcome to Today's Take.
Oh, thanks for having me, Jayne.
First of all, I'd like you to rewind about a week. We're recording this on a Thursday morning in Sydney. Tell us where you were, how this news of Charlie Kirk's assassination first started to filter through to you.
Was in our office, little tiny cubicle in downtown Washington, D.C. Actually, if I remember, I think I was looking forward to sort of having a quietish afternoon when you sort of always appreciate when there's not a breaking news story over here and you get a chance to work on something that you've been working on, for a little while, something a little bit more, I guess you would say, exclusive or
out of the news cycle, perhaps.
Out of the news cycle, that's right. And then up it pops on, I think it was on X, a lot of the sort of news sort of still breaks on X over here and a lot of people use it. And I think that's how I saw something just popped up and instantly it was, Charlie Kirk shot at college in Utah. And I knew Charlie Kirk. I didn't know him personally, but I'd seen him speak at a Trump rally last year when I was over here covering the election. I sometimes quote him in stories because he's a pretty prominent MAGA influencer and activist. And so even though I was sort of aware that a lot of people in Australia probably wouldn't know who this guy was, you were kind of instantly aware that this was going to be a massive story. And at this point, we didn't know. All we knew is that he was shot that it very quickly became clear he was hit, and very quickly the video started going around on social media. And the first video I saw was sort of from far away, in which you could tell he'd been hit, but it wasn't clear how badly. And then that horrible close-up video started going around, which people have probably seen. I kind of wish I could unsee it. And as soon as you saw that, you realised, right, this is he's been hit very badly. It's doubtful he's going to survive. This is going to be a massive story.
And I think that this news was actually breaking as we were on air on the Today Show here in Australia. And I think initially a lot of the reaction was, Charlie Kirk, that name's familiar to some people, but not really a household name in Australia at that point. But it became very quickly, it was very quickly apparent that this was going to have huge implications. How did the American media, I suppose, carry on with that story? Once that initial news had come out that Charlie Kirk had been shot and that he had been killed, I mean, we're used to in these situations, it's pretty soon that a shooter is apprehended, but that wasn't the case here.
That's right. I mean, obviously, I think the first kind of iteration of the news cycle was, obviously the shock that he has been hit. Then it was very much focused on, what condition is he in? And I think it was, for a couple of hours, we weren't really sure. We knew that he'd been rushed to hospital, obviously. But then there was a lot of confusion. It was clear that someone had been apprehended on the site in the large outdoor crowd at Utah Valley University, and it was sort of assumed by a lot of media outlets and just people commenting on the internet that this was the guy responsible, which, is a fairly natural assumption. But then it kind of quickly became clear that that wasn't the suspect, and then it was later confirmed that this guy who had been sort of detained on the scene, there were pictures of him that went around, that he had been released, he'd been questioned and released, he wasn't the suspect. And so then, yes, it became this kind of unusual situation where he hasn't been arrested, he hasn't been killed by a police bullet, he's on the run. And so that then set in motion, obviously, a whole other, news story around, where is this guy gone? And as time goes by, you think, well, he could be anywhere by now. He could have left the country, he could have, traveled over the border to Canada or Mexico or whatever. And so that was sort of pretty unusual, as you say, in these sorts of cases where you have an active shooter. And we've unfortunately had many of them just in the short time that I've been here in the US. And almost all the time, you're looking at someone who either turns the gun on themselves or is taken down by police at the scene.
So I do want to get into that issue, and also how this event has triggered this sort of political tidal wave in America, really, that Barack Obama this morning referred to as, I think it was, an inflection point. But to do that, we really have to understand who Charlie Kirk was. Why was he so influential, and how big was he really in America and in the MAGA movement?
The MAGA movement, he was colossal. This is a young guy, he was 31, very gifted, obviously, politically active from a young age, who, I think it was 2012 when he started Turning Point USA, which is a political advocacy organization, conservative organization. So, what he would have been, trying to do math in my head now, he would have been, 18, which, and it has blossomed into not just a massive political advocacy organization, but what they call in the US a political action committee. It raises money, it spends money, it supports candidates, it does groundwork, it knocks on doors. And in fact, in last year's presidential election, the Trump campaign, rather than using the Republican National Committee, the official party organization, to knock on doors, it outsourced a lot of that groundwork to Charlie Kirk's Turning Point political action group. So it was massive. Vice President J.D. Vance has, in the last few days, talked about how he sought Charlie Kirk's counsel and support when he was first running for the Senate. This is a guy that's in his mid-20s, who's, advising the bloke that goes on to become the Vice President of the USA. He said that he was grateful for having Charlie Kirk's support when Donald Trump was looking for a running mate before the last presidential election. So it's hard to overstate how influential Charlie Kirk is in that MAGA movement. And, the fact that he controls a lot of this money through his organization, and also the fact that he rallied so many young voters behind Donald Trump in the lead up to last year's election. So Charlie Kirk is an evangelical. A lot of the work that he does is kind of talking to young Christian voters, either on campus or, in other settings, but particularly on college campuses. And that was invaluable for Donald Trump last year. And since his assassination, the president has spent a lot of time talking about how he credits Charlie Kirk with, doing very well among younger voters at the last election. So massively important, and that's why you're seeing the seismic reaction that you're seeing.
an incredibly effective communicator, particularly towards that younger generation. Now, we spoke before about how it took a few days for a suspect to be arrested, but it didn't take very long for at least the political blame game to begin. And very early on, blame, I guess, was directed towards the left of politics before there was even a suspect in custody. It really put America's deep divisions on display.
Look, I suppose in some ways that was a fair assumption for people to make. I mean, this is a guy who was famous for being a conservative activist, and he was taken out in what was clearly an assassination. A single bullet fired during a speaking event, but it was just an assumption, and we know that people have complicated motives for these things. I think even now, police are still trying to piece together exactly what went on with this guy. How did he come to develop this desire to assassinate Charlie Kirk? And we know now, according to people who've spoken to police, that he's grown more politically active in recent years, and that he apparently gravitated towards a sort of more left-wing ideology. But before we had heard that, people were making those assumptions. And while it's a fair assumption to make, it's another thing to then kind of go out when you're the president and start saying, well, we're cracking down now on this is left-wing terrorism, left-wing extremism, and we're going to go after these people. And that is what we saw before we really knew anything while the suspect was still at large. The president was saying these sorts of things. So as you say, it has really led to an inflection point about political violence in the US, and the administration certainly knows who it wants to blame and who it's intending to go after in the wake of this. But it's a more complicated picture when we look at things across the board and we take into consideration all of the political violence and other assassinations that have happened in the US only in the last year.
Yeah, I do want to get to that, but I also want to talk to you about, we heard from Charlie Kirk's widow over the weekend, and that was really, a battle cry. I think she even used that phrase, a battle cry. And at this point, it doesn't appear as though anybody close to Charlie Kirk at least had any knowledge of his plans based on the text message. Anyone close to Tyler Robinson had any knowledge of his plans based on the text messages that have been made public. But it seems to, she referred to evildoers. It seems to be, rather than dampening down any tensions, all the rhetoric seems to be flaring things up.
Yeah, I think Erica, the widow, has, and she obviously would be feeling terrible grief and emotion at this time, which we totally understand. I think, those sorts of comments, yes, I guess feed into this narrative that you've heard from many people that, either he can't have been acting alone or he's got to be part of some sort of broader left-wing movement. And we just don't know at this stage to what extent that's true. We know, or we've heard, that he was active online. He spent a lot of time online, and I think playing video games and those sorts of things. And so, perhaps there was exposure to radicalization through those means, but we don't know to what extent this was through some sort of organized movement. So we probably have to wait for more evidence to come out on that front. But there has been, a lot of discussion here in the US about how social media contributes to this kind of radicalization, and how, the sort of seedy underworld of the internet contributes to it. Young men spending a lot of time alone in dark rooms, on the internet, in forums, on Discord threads, in Reddit subthreads, and it's sort of, for a country where, the natural inclination is to say, well, you can, spend your time doing whatever, social media, there's no desire or appetite for censorship, you're now starting to see more and more people kind of question, well, actually, we need to do something about what young men in particular are being exposed to in these sorts of forums.
So we've heard from the administration and other more conservative speakers blaming the left. How has the left side of politics responded to this? Because there obviously have been commentators online who, have expressed support for what happened.
It's a very emotive, divided country, as we all know. And yes, of course, if you search for it on Reddit or you search for it on X, you're going to see people celebrating this. But I think by and large, you're always going to have those kind of fringe people, and I don't know what you can do about that. In terms of people who have influence, in terms of people who have large followings, I mean, only in the last few minutes, pretty much while we've been talking, we've seen Jimmy Kimmel, the late-night TV host, temporarily taken off air for, his comments about Charlie Kirk, and so there's definitely a sensitivity that, and we had another political analyst on MSNBC, Matthew Dowd, who was fired for his comments in the immediate aftermath of the assassination. There's definitely a sensitivity that is being applied here from Charlie Kirk's allies to say, if you are someone in the public eye who is in any way being seen to kind of not even celebrate, but justify or even just question, excuse, or even just say Charlie Kirk may have contributed to this toxic discourse, that there's a spotlight on those people, and potentially they're going to be targeted, and potentially they could lose their jobs. So that's a real dilemma, because this is a country where free speech is prized. It's protected by the First Amendment to the Constitution, but we're now suddenly seeing, we saw the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, just the other day say, we're coming after hate speech. And that's, the implication there was hate speech directed at conservatives, hate speech that whips up or foments anger and potentially violence about conservatives. And, that's unusual in a country that has traditionally prized free speech to such a degree. So I don't think we know yet what the full political ramifications are going to be here in the US, but it is a real galvanizing moment that is going to play out for months, if not years, that's for sure.
So we've spoken about how this has really highlighted the political divisions that were already in place in America, but Michael, I was really struck by an opinion piece that you wrote the other day talking about how in all this discourse after the shooting death of Charlie Kirk, nobody's really talking about the guns. And as an Australian journalist living in America, talk to us about how that fact really struck you.
Yeah, look, it jumped out at me, especially after I kind of, I spent all Sunday morning watching the various political talk shows, and there was just zero discussion about gun laws, gun reforms, access to guns. Now, look, I mean, it's been pointed out to me, and I take this, I take this on board, that the type of gun that he used is kind of readily accessible. Even in Australia, it's not that hard to get. Fair enough, but you don't, in a country like Australia, you don't see people obtaining guns and shooting people that, we have political disagreements with. So whether it's the issue of access to guns, or whether it's this sort of, the prevalence of guns, or just the role that they play in the culture, where, if you have dark thoughts and you have, thoughts about doing something to someone, you're angry, your first thought is to I can get myself a gun. That's what happened. That seems to be what people do. And, we all have, political extremists. We all have people who get radicalized in our countries. We all have, people who maybe have mental health issues. But what we don't all have is guns everywhere, and the ability to get a gun really, really easily. And, you know, in none of these shooting incidents that I've been here for, do you really see anyone in the aftermath start talking about, well, you know, maybe we need to revisit the gun laws. And I guess, you know, if they weren't going to do it after an atrocity like Sandy Hook, where 20 children were gunned down at a primary school, then, you know, they're probably not going to do it now. But it did strike me, you know, kind of sitting here, watching all the discussion, watching the analysis, just the complete absence of any talk about, you know, what can we do about the guns.
And the fact that Charlie Kirk was actually answering a question about gun reform and gun ownership when he was shot, I mean, it's a difficult culture to understand in terms of the support for gun ownership in America when you come from a place like Australia, where there was such wide support for John Howard's gun reforms.
Yeah. I mean, I interviewed a young guy who was at the Utah Valley University campus. He was in the audience watching Charlie Kirk speak, and he witnessed what happened. And I sort of asked him, you know, I said, well, you know, we're talking about how he felt in the aftermath. Obviously, it was a traumatic event, and so I asked him, you know, what do you think about the guns? Now that he was a big fan of Charlie Kirk, I'm like, well, you know, a hero, this guy that you respected, look up to, has just been shot. Has it changed the way that you think about guns and access to guns at all? And he was like, no, not at all. He said, you know, I think it shows maybe what we need to do is not have these outdoor events where there are buildings, you know, around, because obviously Donald Trump last year, when he was hit by that bullet, that was from a rooftop, a sort of low-rise rooftop near the field in Pennsylvania where he was speaking. This was from another low-rise rooftop nearby. So this guy who was there, his view was, well, maybe we need to just not have outdoor events where there are rooftops around. And I sort of said, well, or, you know, maybe you could do something about the guns. But no, he was very much set on, like, that's, if we're going to respond, that's how we respond. So it's a different mentality. You know, the right to bear arms is, for many people, deeply ingrained, and the idea that you would change that doesn't make sense to them. And
this is, you know, we spoke before, it's not the first political assassination in America. Even this year, there was a Democratic politician, Melissa Hortman, and her husband, who were shot dead in June. There was obviously the assassination attempt on Donald Trump during the election campaign. Given what you have observed, I mean, it sounds to me it's unlikely that any attitudes towards gun reform are going to change in America in any time in the foreseeable future.
I don't think so. I mean, especially, I mean, look, not in the immediate aftermath of this, because obviously Charlie Kirk himself was not an advocate for gun reform. You know, he said gun deaths are the price you have to pay for Second Amendment, for the right to bear arms. So he would not have wanted any change in his name. You've got a president in the White House and a Republican Party in control of Congress who are, you know, pro-gun rights. So I don't think we can expect to see any change in that regard. But, you know, it does make you wonder, especially when you see this rate of gun violence. I mean, you know, it's not even just against politicians. You know, it was 10 minutes away from where I am right now, 2 Israeli embassy staffers were shot on the street in Washington, D.C., from someone who came to this city from afar with a gun. And so, you know, it's... And the irony is that you've got a president who's spending a lot of time at the moment cracking down on gun violence in major American cities, you know. We've got the National Guard patrolling the streets here. They're about to go into Memphis. He wants to send them into Chicago because Donald Trump is concerned about violent crime in American cities. But apparently that does not extend to any changes to gun access.
Okay. Let's get back to the political temperature, I guess, which is kind of where this conversation in the wake of Charlie Kirk's death has been. It feels from afar as if there's just so much hate on both sides of this political argument, and this does feel like some kind of tipping point. Can you see, you know, the political temperature dying down at all after this, or do you think this is just going to keep inflaming?
I would make a prediction. I would say it's just going to keep inflaming. It's difficult on both sides. You've got a Republican Party, a president, a White House that has been very vocal about saying this is a left-wing problem. Donald Trump has said point blank he thinks radicals on the right are justified in their concerns about crime and immigration, but it's the radicals on the left that are the problem. Now, you may have Democrats, people on the left, who want to kind of be collegiate and come together in this moment, but they hear something like that and they say, well, what about, Melissa Hortman, the Democratic lawmaker in Minnesota that you just mentioned? This is happening to us as well. It's not just figures on the right. This is happening across the spectrum. But you have a White House, a president that's not willing to admit to that. So in that context, I don't see how it does get better. There were some very good comments. We shouldn't be too pessimistic. There were some very good things said over the past week. I thought the Utah governor, a Republican, Spencer Cox, he was valiant. He was eloquent when he called for a lowering of the temperature. He said, we've got to find an off-ramp to this spiraling of political violence and anger and hatred. But, it's one thing to say we should do that. How you make that happen in a country that, is so big, is so divided, I don't know how you do that. One other thing to say about that is, at the same time, you walk the streets here, you go into bars, you talk to people at cafes, they don't tend to espouse a lot of the extreme rhetoric that you do see either on the internet or from politicians sometimes. So you wouldn't want people to have the impression that all Americans are out there on the fringes, right? I think most people kind of have a very normal, balanced view of these things. But what you do see is that the extreme views are the ones that get a lot of airtime. Indeed, even, people like Elon Musk or, just anyone on X or social media with large followings, they'll often find a post that, is crazy, someone celebrating the assassination of Charlie Kirk, and they'll then, screenshot that and say, isn't this terrible? And so they'll take a post that had 10 views, because it's been posted by someone with no following, and they'll show it to their millions of followers. And you've got to ask, well, what's the point in doing that? You're promoting something that no one was going to see. You're showing it to all your followers and whipping up outrage. I think that's really the thing that, we need to try and bed down is, don't whip up outrage for following because you want retweets, right? You're promoting fringe opinions, making them seem mainstream when they're really not.
Okay, well, finally, Michael, you're obviously trying to make sense of all of this for an Australian audience. What, if anything, do you think Australians should be taking away from the current situation in America? How should we be feeling about it and reacting to it and processing it here?
Look, to kind of continue what I just said before, I read what Australians have to say on, Facebook or on comments on articles and all those sorts of things. And I know that people kind of at the moment, a lot of them look at America and say, what a cesspool, it seems awful, it seems frightening, I don't want to go there anymore. Look, obviously things are tense in many ways, but in many ways, like most normal Americans going about their life, don't have extreme views, don't want political violence or any other form of violence. And it is still, a very brilliant, very exciting country with so many different things to see and do. So, you wouldn't want people to have this kind of warped impression that the place is on fire. Having said that, I think it is a bit of a warning that, when your politics becomes extreme, that, you know, this is what happens. And it's very difficult to unscramble that egg. So I think, you know, Australians should be grateful that we have compulsory voting, that sort of means politics is played in the middle, at the centre. I think we should be glad that we have independent electoral commissions that set the rules, so that we don't have crazy gerrymandering and, you know, politicians trying to set their own rules. We should be proud of those systems that we have, while, you know, at the same time resisting the urge to be too judgmental as the Americans work through this strange time.
Well, Michael, hopefully you can have a few quiet news days in the future so you can go and find us all some more uplifting stories from your America's patch. Michael Koziol, thank you so much for joining today's Take.
Light and shade. Thanks, Jayne.
Thank you. And thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed our chat, please hit subscribe and give us a rating, and maybe take a listen to some of our previous episodes as well. We will be back again next week with another episode of Today's Take. Until then, I will see you bright and early with the rest of the Today team. Have a great day.